It all started with a long drive through the backwoods of New England. A group of 4 friends, Elliot, Zoe, Hannah, and Mark, were heading to a secluded cabin they had rented for a weekend getaway. They were tired of the city, fed up with the noise and the constant hum of technology. They wanted isolation, peace, and, above all, an escape. The trip began uneventfully. The air was thick with the scent of pine, the kind of fresh, earthy smell that almost made you believe in something pure. But that changed when they saw a sign, half covered by vines, barely visible from the road. Ashfield was an old village. It was marked on some maps, but wasn't exactly a tourist spot. It was almost forgotten, tucked away between dense woods, far off the main roads. Elliot, being the curious one, suggested they drive through it just to see what was there. Zoe, the most cautious, disagreed. But it was too late. Mark, always the instigator, had already made a left turn toward the narrow, overgrown road leading into Ashfield. The closer they got, the stranger it seemed. The trees became denser, blocking out much of the sunlight. The air grew heavy with a damp, almost rotten scent. When they finally reached the village, it was like stepping into a time capsule from the past, an eerie silence hanging over the place. Ashfield had been abandoned for decades, but not a single house was destroyed. In fact, everything looked almost too perfect, as if time had simply frozen. There were no signs of life, no animals, no people, not even the sound of birds. Just empty houses with faded paint and overgrown lawns. Zoe's voice trembled as she asked, "Shouldn't we turn back?" But Hannah, the adventurous one, pushed forward. "Come on, let's just have a quick look around. We'll be back to the cabin in no time." The village was small, just a few blocks of cobbled streets, lined with ancient houses. But there was something about it that felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. As they wandered deeper into the village, they found an old church in the center. The building was tall, imposing, with thick, dark windows that seemed to stare back at them. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind, as if inviting them inside. Zoe hesitated. "I don't like this. It feels off." "I'm going in," Mark said, already walking toward the door. The others followed reluctantly, and soon they found themselves inside the church, the air thick with dust. The inside was as strange as the outside. Rows of pews stood empty, the wooden surfaces rotting with age. At the altar, there was a large wooden cross, but what caught their attention was the strange markings etched into the stone floor around it. They were faded, but as Elliot got closer, he could see that they resembled symbols, ancient and almost ritualistic. Suddenly, Hannah gasped. "What is that?" On the far wall of the church was a small, hidden door, barely noticeable unless you were looking closely. It was half open, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. "Should we check it out?" Elliot asked, his voice low and hesitant. Before anyone could respond, they heard a sound, a low hum, like a voice carried on the wind. But it didn't sound human. It sounded like a whisper, but deeper, older, as if the walls of the church were speaking to them. The group was frozen. The air in the church grew colder, the temperature dropping several degrees in an instant. "We need to leave," Zoe said, her voice urgent now. But just as they turned to leave, the door to the church slammed shut with a deafening bang. They were trapped. Inside the church, the temperature continued to drop. Elliot fumbled for his phone, but there was no signal. Zoe tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The eerie silence of the village outside had been replaced by the faint sound of whispers, echoing through the thick stone walls. "All right, what the hell is going on?" Mark said, his voice shaking. "This isn't normal." Hannah, who had been examining the symbols on the floor, looked up slowly. "I think we might have walked into something we shouldn't have." At first, they all thought it was just a power outage or something logical. But then they started to piece together the strange history of Ashfield, which they had heard only in passing from locals before. Ashfield had been a thriving town until the early 1900s, when a series of unexplained disappearances began. People had started to vanish in the dead of night, leaving no trace behind. Local authorities had never solved the mystery. By 1915, the village had been completely abandoned. Most of the houses were left standing, but those who had lived there were never seen again. Zoe's hands were shaking as she dug through an old pamphlet she found in one of the pews. It was brittle with age, but the text was still legible. The Ashfield incident, it read, a curse on the land. A town built on forgotten rituals. There was something about the way it was worded that gave her chills. Rituals? Zoe asked, her voice trembling. Mark, who had been staring down the stairwell into the blackness below, finally spoke. We need to leave. Now. But they couldn't. The door was locked from the outside. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder. The air grew thick with tension, the very walls seeming to hum with the unspoken words. And then, in the darkness, something moved. A shadow. Tall, thin, and almost unnatural. Hannah screamed. It was then they realized the truth. They weren't alone. The dark figure seemed to pulse and shift in the shadows, its form barely visible but ever present. The whispers intensified, almost deafening. The room seemed to close in on them. Every instinct told them to run, but they couldn't move. Zoe backed away, her breath quick and shallow. What is that? Mark stood frozen, eyes locked onto the figure. I don't know, but we need to get out. But as they tried to make their way to the door, it felt as though the entire church was alive, the very walls closing in around them. The floor beneath them trembled. There was something down in the depths of the church, something ancient and full of rage. And that was when they realized whatever was in the basement, whatever had been buried for so long, was waking up. Let me know how you're feeling about the direction. I can keep building on it and expand with additional suspenseful encounters, creepy backstory details, and flesh out the plot further until we have a full 1-hour tale. If you have any specific elements you'd like added, feel free to let me know. The oppressive silence inside the church had turned into something almost tangible, like a weight pressing down on their shoulders. Elliot, Zoe, Mark, and Hannah stood in the center of the room, too afraid to move. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the faint, whispering voices seemed to come from all directions. It wasn't just the church that was haunted. It was the very ground beneath their feet. What the hell is happening? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned around to face his friends, but they seemed as frozen as he was. The shadow, now clearly visible, stretched across the far wall. It flickered and danced, moving in unnatural, jerking motions. It wasn't just a silhouette. There was something distinctly wrong about it. The figure seemed to have limbs that weren't quite human, twisting and contorting like some grotesque mockery of a person. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. It's not real. It can't be. But as soon as she spoke, the air shifted again. The figure didn't just move, it reached out toward them. I told you we shouldn't have come here, Zoe cried, her eyes wide with terror. This place isn't just abandoned, it's cursed. Before they could react, the ground beneath them shuddered, and the whispers grew louder, clearer, like a chant. Get out! Get out! The voice was deep, echoing, and yet disturbingly familiar, like an ancient language being forced into their minds. Elliot staggered back, his heart hammering in his chest. We're not alone. There's something inside us. The shadows surrounding them started to writhe, gathering together in one massive form. It was as if they were being drawn toward the altar, toward the mysterious symbols on the floor. The walls of the church seemed to close in, the space shrinking. Panic began to rise in their throats. Hannah, we need to get out now, Mark shouted, his voice desperate. But the door remained locked. They were trapped. The dark figure reached out, its skeletal fingers grazing the air. The temperature dropped even further. It was freezing now, a bitter chill that gnawed at their skin. And then it spoke, its voice not just heard, but felt, vibrating in their bones. Leave this place. The curse will never let you go. Zoe screamed. The figure moved closer, and they all felt a cold, sharp wind rushing at them, as if the very atmosphere was conspiring to choke the life from their bodies. Mark, who had been closest to the stairwell, stumbled back in terror. It's coming from below. We need to go down there. We need to stop it. Without another word, they all rushed to the basement stairs, their feet slipping on the cracked stone floor. As they descended, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. They reached the bottom, and the air down here was thick with rot, and the smell of something long dead. At the far end of the basement, they could just make out a figure, a tall, gaunt man, standing motionless in the dark. His back was to them, but his presence felt like a weight pressing down on them. Mark reached for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The man didn't move. He didn't even breathe. Suddenly, the man turned. His face was pale, hollow, with deep-set eyes that glowed with an unnatural, greenish hue. His lips parted, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was more than just a sound. It was a wave of force that rattled their minds. The shadows around them deepened, swirling like a storm contained in a single space. Zoe stumbled back in horror. Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step toward them. As it did, the shadows around it seemed to grow longer, reaching for them, clawing at their ankles like desperate hands. Elliot backed away. "This place, it's feeding on us, on our fear." "I can't breathe," Hannah gasped, clutching her chest. The figure smiled, an unsettling, wide grin that seemed to stretch far beyond what was humanly possible. "You're too late. The curse has already claimed you." Zoe's heart raced. She could feel the presence of something ancient and wicked, something that had been buried for years, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Mark, trying to steady himself, grabbed a nearby pipe and swung it toward the figure. But the pipe passed right through the man's body, as if he wasn't even there. The figure didn't flinch. It just stared. It's too late for escape. Suddenly, the church bell tolled in the distance, loud, booming, and distorted. The sound was maddening. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, as if the earth itself was alive, reacting to something hidden deep within it. Elliot realized what was happening too late. This wasn't just a curse. It was an awakening. The shadows twisted violently, and the air began to crackle with an electric charge. The walls of the basement seemed to grow and shift, expanding and contracting like something alive. And then they saw it, a hole in the center of the floor, an unnatural darkness swallowing everything around it. That wasn't there before," Mark said, his voice trembling. Zoe nodded, unable to take her eyes off the growing hole. "No, it wasn't." From the depths of the blackness, a figure emerged. Not a man, not a shadow, but something far worse. It was the source of the curse, the thing that had been buried beneath the church for centuries. It was a monster, a grotesque mass of sinew and bone, its body covered in pulsating veins, its eyes empty, hollow. It towered over them, casting a shadow that stretched to the ceiling. As it crawled out from the hole, the walls of the basement shook with an ominous rumble. A deep, guttural growl filled the room, and the air seemed to thicken with an overwhelming pressure. "You awaken me." The monster's voice was 1,000 voices, each one more terrifying than the last. "And now you will join me." The ground cracked open beneath them, and they fell into the darkness. The fall was endless. The world spun around them in a disorienting blur of light and shadow. When they finally landed, it was on soft, wet earth. They were in a massive cavern, huge, stretching for miles in every direction. The air was thick, oppressive, and the silence was suffocating. A single flickering light illuminated the cavern, casting long shadows on the jagged walls. And there, in the center of the cavern, was the creature, the thing that had been awakened. It stood in front of them now, towering and terrifying. Its eyes were like black voids, pulling everything into them. It was the thing that had once been a man, the last remaining soul of Ashfield. This place was never meant to be. Elliot was the first to speak. What are you?" The creature's lips twisted into a smile, revealing teeth that seemed to have no end. "I was the protector, the guardian of the old ways. But those who came before you, they used my power. The rituals they performed were meant to bring something greater, something darker. And now you have awakened it." The whispers returned, louder now. The voices of the village, the voices of the lost souls who had perished, echoed through the cavern. Their cries for help mixed with the monster's growls, filling the space with pure terror. And then, the creature spoke again. "You will never leave." The final battle for survival rages on, with the friends faced with impossible choices and a monstrous force closing in. I'm continuing to develop the layers of horror and expanding the story with twists, tension, and moments of dread. This will be a multi-part saga with a gradual build-up toward the ultimate terror of Ashfield. If you'd like me to continue or adjust anything specific, let me know. The cavern felt like an eternal prison, suffocating and oppressive. The air, thick with humidity, clung to their skin. Elliot, Zoe, Mark, and Hannah lay motionless on the damp ground, shaken by their fall into this nightmare. Each of them could hear their own heartbeat, pounding in their ears, drowning out the whispers that seemed to come from the very walls of the cavern. The creature, the thing that had once been human, stood before them, its massive, hulking form shrouded in shadows. Its pale, lifeless eyes seemed to pierce through them, as if it could see into their very souls. The stench of death and decay filled the cavern, overpowering everything else. Zoe tried to move, but found herself paralyzed by a mix of fear and the sheer weight of the air around her. "What do you want from us?" she whispered, her voice trembling, though she knew it would do no good. The creature's hollow, distorted voice responded, "I am the keeper of the forgotten. You have awoken me, and now you must pay the price." Elliot clenched his fists. "No, we didn't know. We didn't know anything about this place." His voice cracked, raw with panic. The weight of their situation was finally sinking in. They were trapped in some forsaken underworld, surrounded by an evil older than anything they could comprehend. The creature loomed closer, its long, clawed hands dragging across the stone ground. "It does not matter. You are here now. You belong to Ashfield. You will join the others who have crossed the line, whose souls are now bound to the land. Forever." Mark, who had been silent for the most part, now found his voice. "Others? Who else? What happened here?" His throat was tight, but he needed answers. They all did. The creature's lips curled upward, forming a grotesque, mocking smile. The village of Ashfield was built upon the blood of the innocent. A pact, a ritual that called forth dark powers in exchange for prosperity. The villagers made the deal centuries ago, and when they betrayed it, the price was paid. I, the Guardian, was summoned to protect the curse and punish those who tried to leave, or those who stumbled upon the secret. Zoe's mind raced. The disappearances, the people who vanished, were they taken by you? By this curse? Yes. The voice rumbled, deep and primal. They were the first to pay the price for Ashfield's sins. The land thirsted for their souls, and I gave them willingly. They became part of me, part of the land, like you will. Mark shot a glance at the others. There was no escape, no hope. The terror of Ashfield's curse wasn't just an old story. It was real. And now, they were a part of it. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble again. But this time, wasn't just the shifting of the earth. It was something deeper, something far more unnatural. The cavern walls seemed to pulse, as though alive. The air grew even colder, and the whispers, once faint, were now deafening. The very stones around them seemed to shift, forming new shapes, new paths, as if the cavern itself was closing in on them. Zoe's heart raced. What is this? What's happening? The ritual is beginning. The creature's voice sent a chill down her spine. The barrier is weakening, and now the ancient forces will awaken in full. You must join the others in the land of Ashfield, or you will be consumed. Before they could even respond, the cavern seemed to transform. The walls cracked open, revealing a series of strange, glowing symbols carved into the stone. They pulsed with an eerie light, filling the space with an otherworldly glow. And then, as if summoned by the ritual itself, shadowy figures began to emerge from the cracks. These figures, humanoid in shape but twisted and distorted, lurched toward them. Their faces were hollow, their bodies little more than skin stretched over bones, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural hue as the creatures. Elliot stumbled backward. What are they? Who are they? They are the souls of the lost, the creature intoned, its voice reverberating through the cavern. Those who tried to escape the curse. They are bound to me, forever imprisoned in this place. Zoe gasped. These These are the people of Ashfield, the ones who disappeared. They become monsters. The figures slowly surrounded them, their hollow eyes staring with unblinking intensity. They reached for the group, their bony fingers grazing against their skin, sending waves of cold, paralyzing terror through their bodies. "We have to get out," Mark whispered. "We have to fight." But the creature's voice rose above all others. "You cannot escape. You belong to Ashfield now. The land has claimed you. The ritual will begin, and you will be part of me." The walls of the cavern seemed to close in on them, the ceiling descending, crushing the very air from their lungs. The glow of the symbols intensified. The monstrous figures drew closer. The temperature dropped, and the shadows around them grew longer, thicker, as if the very darkness itself was coming alive. Panic surged through Elliot as he backed toward the cavern's wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "There has to be another way. There has to be something we can do." Hannah, her face pale and stricken with fear, suddenly whispered, "The markings, they're from the church." Elliot's eyes widened in realization. The symbols they had seen in the church, the same ones that had been carved into the floor, the same ones that pulsed with dark energy in the cavern. "They're connected," Hannah continued, her voice breaking. "The ritual in the church, it started something, but maybe we can stop it. We just need to destroy the source." The creature snarled, "You cannot stop what has already begun. The ritual is beyond your understanding. The land has claimed you. There is no escape." Elliot turned to the others. "We can't just stand here. We need to find a way to sever the connection. We need to destroy the source." Zoe nodded, desperation clouding her eyes. "But how? How do we stop this?" The ground began to tremble again, and the shadows drew closer. But then Elliot saw something, a faint, glowing line etched into the cavern's far wall. It was the same symbol that had been at the center of the church, the one that surrounded the altar. "Over there," he shouted, pointing. "The source is on the wall. If we could destroy that symbol, we might be able to break the curse." Without thinking, they rushed toward the symbol, the shadowy figures closing in from all sides. The air seemed to grow heavier, suffocating them, but they pressed on. The creature's laughter echoed in the cavern, mocking them. "You think you can destroy me? You think you can stop what has already been set in motion?" But as they reached the wall, they found the symbol carved into the stone was far deeper than they had anticipated. It was like a scar, a wound that had been etched into the very fabric of the earth. The symbol was glowing brightly now, and its pulse quickened. "We need something, anything," Mark shouted, his voice breaking. Hannah's eyes fell upon a sharp rock jutting out from the cavern floor. With trembling hands, she picked it up. "I can do this. I have to." With all the strength she could muster, she thrust the stone into the symbol, scraping it against the stone as though trying to tear it apart. The walls shook violently as she did, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble echoed throughout the cavern. The glowing symbol flickered, dimmed, and then cracked. A dark, shuddering noise filled the space as the symbol began to break apart, stone fragments falling to the ground like dust. The creature screamed in fury. "No, you cannot undo what is done." But it was too late. As the symbol shattered, a violent burst of energy erupted from the cavern floor, sending a wave of light and sound through the entire space. The cavern trembled as if it were collapsing in on itself. The shadows shrieked as they were pulled back into the depths of the earth, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The creature howled in rage as it began to disintegrate, its massive form collapsing into a pile of dust. The air grew still. The oppressive weight lifted. The ground ceased trembling. The whispers faded into silence. When the dust settled, the cavern was eerily quiet. The threat was gone. The curse broken. The group of friends stood in the aftermath, exhausted, shaken, and unsure if they were even alive. We did it," Zoe asked, her voice hoarse. Elliot took a deep breath, looking around. The oppressive darkness had lifted. The air felt lighter. "Yeah, we did." But even as they turned to leave, they could still feel the eyes of the land upon them. The echoes of Ashfield's curse were not entirely gone, but the darkness had been stopped for now. As they left the cavern and made their way back up into the open air, they realized something. They had escaped. But would they ever truly be free? The forest surrounding Ashfield seemed quieter now. But even so, they didn't look back. The village might be gone, but Ashfield's curse had left a mark on them that would never fade. They had seen the darkness, and they would never forget the horror that had been unleashed upon them. And the land? The land of Ashfield would always wait, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon its cursed secrets. The world outside the cavern felt almost unreal. After everything they had seen, the sun shining down on them was a mockery of the horrors they just faced. Ashfield, what was left of it, stood like a husk, a shadow of the village it once was. The forest, once suffocating, now felt strangely peaceful, as though it was no longer watching them. No whispers, no movement in the trees. It was as if the curse had not only been lifted, but had unraveled the very fabric of the place. Zoe, her face pale and worn, took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wiped tears from her eyes. "I can't believe we're out, it's over." Mark was silent beside her, his hand gripping his flashlight like a lifeline. "Is it really over, though?" His voice was strained, his eyes scanning the surroundings with unease. Elliot looked out at the horizon, where the edges of the forest met the overcast sky. He felt a deep, gnawing sensation in his gut, a sense that they hadn't truly escaped the clutches of Ashfield. That place, its evil, its curse, wasn't something you just walked away from. "We still don't understand it all," Elliot said, his voice quiet. "There's more to this, more we don't know." Hannah, who had been quiet for most of the walk, suddenly spoke. What if the curse wasn't just about the village? What if it's about all of us?" The words hit them like a cold wind. They stopped in their tracks, the weight of her statement hanging in the air. "What do you mean?" Zoe asked, though she already had a sinking feeling about what Hannah was suggesting. Hannah's face had a haunted look in her eyes. "We barely made it out of the cavern. The symbols were powerful, too powerful. They want to claim us. They wanted us to become part of the land. What if the curse didn't just die when we broke the symbol? What if we're still part of it?" Elliot felt a chill run through him. Could it be possible? Could the curse have already claimed them in ways they couldn't even see? "We need to go back," Elliot said abruptly. "We need to go back to the church and make sure everything is sealed. If there's even a trace left, if the land's evil is still here, it's not over." Mark sighed. "You're right. But how do we even know we can destroy it all? What if it's too late? What if we're already infected with it? What if we've already been marked?" There was no clear answer. The uncertainty weighed heavily on them, but there was no turning back now. The church, now in the distance, loomed like a specter from their past. It looked even more dilapidated than it had before, as if the curse had never truly let it go. The wooden doors creaked as they pushed them open, and a cold breeze greeted them, colder than the one they had experienced before. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of mildew and rot. Though it was strange, the air felt oddly alive. Alive in the way that a predator moves toward its prey. The altar was still there, covered in the same ancient symbols. The markings on the floor seemed to pulse faintly, as though the very earth itself was breathing. "I don't like this," Zoe muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward her throat. "It feels wrong. It's like it's waiting for us." Elliot nodded, but didn't say anything. He was focused on the altar, studying the symbols. They were exactly as he remembered, complex and strange, a mess of interlocking shapes and designs that had no clear meaning at first glance. "We can't destroy it the same way we did before," Mark said, glancing at the symbols on the floor. "We need something stronger, something that can sever whatever link is still here." Hannah frowned, walking toward the altar, her gaze locked on the strange markings. "What if we don't just need to destroy the symbols? What if we need to reverse the ritual? What if that's what's been holding it all together?" Elliot thought for a moment, then turned back to the altar. "It makes sense. If the symbols were used to bind the curse, maybe there's a way to reverse them, to sever the curse by undoing the ritual." The four of them stood in the center of the church, as silent as the shadows around them. For a long time, There was nothing but the faint echo of their breath in the cold, dark room. Suddenly, the floor groaned beneath them, and the symbols on the floor started to glow again, faint at first, then growing brighter, as if they were coming to life. A low rumbling filled the air, like the earth itself was groaning in pain. Hannah gasped. "It's happening again. The ritual. It's trying to start again." Elliot sprinted toward the altar, trying to understand what they had missed. "We need to stop it. We need to reverse it now." As he touched the altar, a surge of energy shot through his hand, making him flinch back in pain. The symbols on the altar began to glow with an intense light, blinding them all. A deep, guttural voice echoed from the walls, the voice of the creature they had encountered in the cavern. "You cannot escape. You belong to me. Ashfield is my home, and you'll never leave." The light from the symbols intensified, and the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing the same deep, swirling abyss they had encountered in the cavern. The very fabric of reality seemed to tear at the seams. Mark, his eyes wide with terror, shouted, "This is it. We can't stop it. We'll be sucked in again." But Hannah, her voice determined, pulled a small, ancient-looking book from her backpack. This was in the ruins. It was hidden inside a hollow stone in the church. It's a journal from the original villagers. It talks about the ritual, about a way to undo the curse. Elliot reached for the journal, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. The text was cryptic, but there were symbols that matched the ones on the floor. "Here," Elliot said. "We need to draw this. We need to replicate the symbols in reverse order." Hannah nodded quickly, tearing a piece of cloth from her shirt and using it to mark the symbols onto the floor. The others helped as the floor continued to crack and rumble beneath their feet. As they worked, the light from the symbols blazed brighter, and the air grew heavier. It felt as though the walls of the church were pressing in on them. The growls and howls of the creature echoed through the church, louder now, closer. "We're almost there," Mark said, his voice tight. With trembling hands, Elliot finished the last symbol, and they all stepped back, watching the floor. For a brief, terrifying moment, nothing happened. But then, there was a loud, deafening crash, like the sound of the world collapsing. The light from the symbols flickered, dimmed, and then the church was silent. The rumbling stopped. The air cleared. The creature's voice had gone. For a long time, they stood there, breathing in the stillness. The walls of the church seemed to hold their breath, as if they, too, were waiting. Elliot took a step forward, cautiously, eyes scanning the room. Is it over? Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the once thriving village. The trees, now devoid of any ominous whispers, stood still. It was like Ashfield had been erased from the world, but not without leaving its mark. They had survived, but as they stood at the edge of the clearing, looking back at the church, something lingered. A feeling, a whisper. The curse hadn't entirely let them go. Maybe it never would. "Do you think we'll ever be truly free?" Zoe asked, her voice soft. "I don't know," Elliot replied, staring at the empty ruins of the village. "But for now, I think we've broken the cycle." Mark nodded. "But we'll always carry Ashfield with us, won't we? It's part of us now." The silence that followed spoke louder than any words. The air was still. The curse had been broken, but its shadow would remain in their memories forever. For the rest of their lives, they would never escape the terror that Ashfield had introduced into their world. They turned and walked away from the village, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would never forget what they had faced and what they had survived. The end.